Hi everyone, I'm Laura from Duo and this is Sarah.
Um,
So for week 2 of our Leaders Who Lead series, we're going to be talking about high impact conversations. I think this is something that we're seeing a lot of currently, of managers and leaders either struggling to have all the conversations they need to have and communicate as much as they need to do in the time, or struggling with how to get things across clearly and concisely. So Sarah, I don't know if you want to kick us off.
Yeah. So, one of the things really is about communicating the facts. So, how do you make sure that when you are communicating that you're not holding back on the facts because you don't know them? So sometimes what we've seen is that some people are staying away from communicating until they know exactly what's going on. But actually what that does is it leaves the rest of the team to create their own sort of narrative. And sometimes what that means is they don't know what the facts are, so they make them mean what they want to make them mean. What we're saying is if you're leading a business, communicate the facts that you have. And if you don't have an update, still touch base and say there has been no update. It's about feeling connected. And there's lots of different ways of communicating that message. So, we're seeing some really great examples with our clients around making sure that the facts get disseminated in a consistent way. So we've got some people doing that through weekly newsletters. We've got central portals being set up, so information at a certain time of the week's being disseminated in there. And sometimes we've had some clients are even doing piece to camera messages. So they're really connecting with the rest of the people in the business, but keep to the facts. And if you don't know them, say this is what we do know, and we'll update you when we know different. Because I think the environment is forever open to change and uncertainty, so we need to make sure that we are given the things that we do have at our fingertips, but also being really open and honest and saying this is what we know, so this is all we can give you right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think following on from that, keeping a pulse on the engagement levels of your team. We're hearing a lot of, well, I'm not hearing that things are not great, so I'm assuming that everything's fine. Challenge with that is that depending on people's behavioral patterns, they might not always tell you until it's potentially too late. So finding some way to measure, only you will know what's best for your business, how open your team normally are, how well you know them. That can be anything from a one-to-one where, we talked in the first video around vulnerability. And if you feel like you've got that connection with your team where you're able to be vulnerable and equally they are, then one-to-one settings might be okay, just to say, listen, how are you doing? Is everything okay? For other businesses where maybe you feel like you might not get to the bottom of something, you might want to think about doing surveys of some kind. You can do pulse surveys where you send out 1 or 2 questions a week. A good technique with that we've seen work well is having people score 1 to 10, how are you feeling this week? And then just give a reason why. Or doing more structured surveys around, actually doing a full engagement survey or doing a survey based on something currently. So we've had clients do a remote working survey to ask about really get some insight about what people need to work better remotely. We've had people do back to work surveys, preparing people for going back to work and asking them how they feel about it, what fears they might have when the time comes, just anything to gauge some level of engagement, and also to inform your communications and, inform sort of those things that you want to hear from people.
Yeah, I think the other piece really that we're finding, certainly with the leaders of the businesses we're working with, and some of the surveys we've done actually, how do you have high impactful conversations and maximize the time that you have? Because time is the one thing that's super precious. And although for some of us we may have gained a little bit of time from not doing the commute, or sometimes video meetings are shorter, but there's always things to fill it with. So how do you make sure that you're able to have the communication you need and the intel you need in a way that's really, really productive? So we've been using a model with a number of our clients for years actually, but we've actually implemented this system in with a number of new clients. And really one of the things that was brought to our attention was, how do I know what's going on with all of my managers? Like, I haven't got enough time to touch base with everybody, and I don't know everything that's going on. So we use a system, a model, which we call the sync meeting, and it's about being able to gather everybody together, the leader in the business, to do a very brief update using a scorecard system, which is pre-populated before the meeting, and then each person in a management team, for example, giving a 1-minute update on the things that they need the rest of the managers to know. So the intel is in the scorecard, and people look at that before they join the meeting. And then actually someone who facilitates it, which we have been doing for clients, they then keep everybody on point, on time. And those meetings shouldn't last any longer than half an hour. Or for some people, depending on the size of the business, it might be slightly more. But really, that's a great way of having a snapshot of what's going on across your business. And there's no excuse for you not to have touch base with everybody on a regular basis. It's almost like if you were, stuck on a desert island and you couldn't get in touch with anybody, you'd be able to open up that scorecard and it would give you a snapshot of the business and exactly where you're at. So that's a great way of maximizing time and getting maximum output from it. That's a particularly useful way to set up structure, particularly now.
Yeah. And I think equally in a one-to-one setting, often it's that piece around be timely and be concise, because often that's what people drives people away from meetings. So that sync meeting, like Sarah said, often what we were finding that businesses were having like 2-hour management meetings, just update meetings. Now, obviously you're going to have meetings around strategy, but update meetings, or they were trying to catch up with every manager individually, which just isn't realistic. But even on a one-to-one level, you can do this quickly. An old but amazing book, if you haven't read it, or if you've read it but you want a refresher, The 1 Minute Manager is still, in my mind, one of the best leadership books out there, and you can pretty much read it in an hour. So if you haven't read that for a while, or you've never read it, it's useful to pick up a copy. But the whole thought process behind that piece is that you can get great results in very little time. And sometimes all the peripheral stuff that we add into a conversation isn't valuable. It goes back to that 80-20 rule. You get most of the results from that 20%. So there's a whole theory in that around 1-minute conversations. So how you set goals in a minute, how you check in a minute, how you give a piece of praise, or how you give a piece of corrective action. So, with goals, and we actually use some of these strategies with our team, it's things like, we'll say, okay, what's your top 3 priorities for this week? And it gives us an immediate snapshot that if we need to correct a course, we can do it quickly. Or, what's the one goal you're working on this week? And if you're going to give corrective feedback over something, don't add all the peripheral stuff. Just say, okay, well, I think with that, we might need to look at doing this differently. It will save time for you, it'll save time for the other person, and people get more open to having those conversations when they know, all right, okay, this might just be a 5 or 10 minute catch up, versus everyone knows the person that they have a meeting with and it lasts 2 hours every time, and you come out of the meeting thinking, what did we just talk about for the last 2 hours? Those are the people you don't want to meet with. Yeah. It's like,
absolutely. A caveat to that is these meetings, what we're referring to is specific meetings that are about a snapshot. That doesn't mean that we're not saying there isn't a place for interaction, conversation, because often working remotely, that's the bit that people are missing. So there is a time and a place for that. We're not saying this replaces those conversations. But what it does do is a manager or a leader in the business, it gives you the snapshot, the overview, and what it also does is give everybody else at the same time the same snapshot. And I think that's the piece, isn't it, Laura?
Yeah, it's that you still need to do the rapport building stuff, so you might still do a catch up with somebody, but if you want to just catch up specifically on their goals and give them some corrections, you can jump on a Zoom for 5 minutes. These tools don't have to be just used for those long meetings, and it's making sure you do those check-ins, because often on a remote basis it's that stuff that gets lost.
Yeah.
A lot of managers are doing well at the sort of weekly meetings or the sort of more structured one-to-ones, but the sort of quick check-ins, course correction type stuff is sometimes the stuff that's fallen to the wayside. So as we mentioned in our last video, all of this work is linked to a free online platform where we have exercises around all of the things we've gone through today. So click on the link if you want to access those workbooks for free. And as always, if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out to Sarah or I. Thanks.
Thanks.